And so let's take a look at this. You first thing, like you say, like, oh, all these critters have very, very dramatically different bone structures. But really, it's just the same framework. Just what part of your foot are you walking on? Are you flat-footed? Right? Are you up on your toes? See, this one has now just gone up on the toes. So these bones right here, the metacarpal bones in the hand here, are up off the ground. And in this case, you've gone from that to walking on the tips of your toenails. And look at what happens to the position of the wrist. So here the wrist is on the ground, up a little bit here in our buddy the lion, and then like halfway up the leg here in the deer. So when you look at a mammal, what you want to try to train yourself initially to do is to pick out where the different joints are. Like, let's look at this front leg here. All right? Can you see its shoulder? Yeah. So somewhere right up in here will be our shoulder. Where is it? You can see its elbow and its wrist. Right. Now, on the back leg, you're going to have a hip somewhere in here, a knee roughly in there, and then a heel right down there on the ground. So what you want to be able to try to do is kind of go shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, knee, heel, and then do that same thing looking at different critters. So let's take a look at this one. Can you see its elbow? So very often the elbows you're going to see right about at the level of the body. So that's the point of our elbow right in there. So there's our shoulder somewhere roughly in here to an elbow. The wrist right down here. And then we are walking on our toes. I have a hip, I have a knee, I have a heel. And the same sort of pattern that you see with the dogs, you also see with the cats. So Paris, this is for you. All right? So here's my big shoulder blade. Somewhere about in here, I have the point of my shoulder. Hard for me to put my finger on exactly the spot, but roughly somewhere in here is where my shoulder will be. My upper arm goes back to my elbow here, down to my wrist. And notice the wrist is a little bit off the ground, so it's not like the bear where this was flat-footed. Can you see about where the hip is? And the knee? And look at the heel. Isn't that cool? So what people will look at this and they'll say they've got a backwards facing knee. Yeah, no, it's a regular facing heel. It's just that we're off the ground. And all right, take a look at the front leg of that deer and see if you can make that make sense to yourself. Can you find shoulder, elbow, wrist? What joint is this? That's the elbow. So there's my elbow. This deer is doing this. This bone right here, these bones right here in the middle of the deer's hand have become fused together into one long bone. That is the equivalent of this part of the wrist. So you see that joint is about halfway below the halfway to the ground.
The wrist.
The wrist. So here's my wrist, right down here.
Looks like a knee.
Yep. So the knee is going to be in the back legs. So they have a hip, they have a knee, roughly at the level of the belly, and the heel back here. This one in side view, this is really, really nice. Notice how the knee and the elbow, you really don't see those below the wall of the body. So what you have sticking out on the bottom is the front legs coming out fairly straight. We have this big spring of the back legs. try a moose. So I have these sort of weird bendy legs sticking out the bottom. Can I borrow somebody's a notebook to make a little diagram? Okay. So on here, oh, look, there's a moose. So I just learned to draw fast. All right. I'm going to come bring it over here too, so we have that moose off there. So for the quick sort of first kind of glimpse at the mammal, I have a box with a back leg that is bending coming off of it. I have a front leg that is coming down straight. There's my quick first mammal. Right? And what's happening is I'm seeing that knee to heel and foot sticking out in the back. Notice that the front legs are coming down straight, the back legs are bent like a spring. Thank you very much. This pattern with back legs being bent, front legs straight, you're going to see across all these different animals. All these different quadrupeds are going to have the same basic similar situation. What it is that the back legs have a very different function than the front legs. The back legs are this big muscular spring. Right? And you think of the bone of the back leg fits chunk directly into the skeleton of the deer in a ball and socket joint right up here. So the back leg is this big bent spring. It fits directly into the skeleton, so any push off of the back legs propels the animal forward. So the back legs are for power. The front leg has a very, very different purpose. The purpose of the front legs is that when the back legs push off, the front legs are going to make sure that the head doesn't slam into the ground. Right? So you push off if you have no front legs, landing is going to be a problem. So what they do is they have two front legs, and you're going to take those two front legs and you're going to hold them out straight. The back legs push off, the front legs come out straight and kunk. Right? And so they're going to land straight, and they don't break their shoulder. Human beings, we kind of come down, we're constantly breaking a shoulder. Right? We are not made to take a whole bunch of weight and slam it down onto the ground. These guys are. Our human beings, our shoulder blades are flat across our back like this, like two plates. Right? And then we have this box of our collarbones, and our shoulder is, or shoulder bone is, or arm bone is stuck into that. On these, it's totally different. You have the shoulder blade riding on the side of the animal, attached with ligaments and tendons and strapped on with muscles here. It is riding here on the side so that when you put weight on it, the whole thing shifts up. So it's not rigidly stuck in there, so it makes a good shock absorber. If you have a cat at home, watch your cat. And have the cat tell you, like, here, kitty, kitty, and watch the cat come towards you. And as it does, you'll see the two shoulder blades. Every time it puts weight on it, going doom, 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 doom. We can't do that, because our little primate shoulder blades are flat across our back here. All right? So totally different function here. The spring in the back, the straight support bars up front. All right? So that's the first sort of big difference. And that little diagram of the box with the bent in back, the straight in front, is a really good way of sort of quickly summarizing what's going on there. So let's take a look at a couple of these critters and see how I might throw down a few initial sketch lines to give the structure of this critter. What are some of the quick lines that I first put down to give me the posture, the proportions, and the basic shape of this animal? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a couple of these. As we do this, you'll see that what I'm doing at the start is not focusing on the fur. And how do you draw the fur texture? I'm going to try to get the overall structure of this animal down on my piece of paper with a few lines. I'm going to try to get the structure, the proportions, and the body angles. If you start by drawing fur and thinking about that when you begin drawing it. It's like drawing a tree by drawing a whole bunch of leaves. You get this drawing that kind of looks like a pile of leaves, right? But if instead you start with the structure, then when you're sticking the leaves on it, you're putting the fur texture on top of it, you're putting that across a scaffolding that feels like that animal. So that the structure behind there is critical for a really good mammal drawing. So let's take a look at how, this isn't the only way to do it, but this is one way of approaching it. What I suggest you do is sort of try out some of these ideas, see what works for you, and so that you can see a critter and be able to block in the major kind of body shapes. How do you kind of block in that body and get something that feels like that critter? For me, just like with drawing birds, my top 3 things that I'm looking at are what I call the posture, the proportion, and angles. I do that with birds. We're going to take a look at what that means in terms of drawing a mammal. By the posture, the easiest way I find to think about that is imagine the spine of the bird. Yes. Imagine the spine of the mammal here. As the animal's jumping or doing something, that's going to bend, that's going to contort, and that often is a really sort of great sort of, a first line I'll do is sort of imagine the back. It gives me a sort of a quick sense of the oomph, the energy of the animal. If it's leaping up, it's going to be a line coming up like that. And I'm going to construct the rest of the drawing over that. By proportions, I'm really talking about how big is the body this way compared to this way? How high is it off the ground? How far away is the head from the body? How big is that head? So the size and the proportions of these different elements. And we'll take a look at how I think about that. And lastly, the angles. If you look around this deer, there are real corners. Right? Here on the bottom, boom, boom. Right? It's easy to get these animals that are just over-rounded, but it's these corners that really carve this animal and make it look like a deer. So we want to have a way of intentionally looking for this. Good to see you. All right, so here is a deer who's going to help us out with this. What I'm going to do is map onto this what some of the initial lines might be that would help generate a drawing like this one. So this way you can sort of see what I would be looking at. And just think of the blue lines that are coming on the screen are going to be like some of the original initial lines that I would make. I like to make these, can I borrow your non-photo blue pencil? I like to start off a drawing with one of these erasable non-photo blue pencils. This puts down a really pale ghost line that I can then draw on top of with all my details. So I'll put down the full framework with this, and then come back and draw all my details. And I'm thinking about hair texture and all that sort of stuff. It's hard to, if I'm thinking about hair texture and the details of the outline, to also get the body proportions to really feel like the critter in the right way. Thank you very much. So here's how I would start. Here's sort of what I might envision loosely this spine as doing. So I'm thinking kind of the flow of that. If this animal were jumping or standing up there or starting to lay down, that this will take different angles, but this quick line in an animal that's moving around, if it's moving around a lot, I might make several of these initially as I'm watching a little group of animals. And then, after I've got my initial posture line in there, I'm going to start thinking of proportions. That is, how big is this body? And here's the easiest way to think about proportions. In a side view, I imagine a box around the shoulder, the butt, the top, the bottom of this critter. This box is going to have different shape, different proportions depending on what critter it is. If you're looking at a cow, it's going to be a long horizontal box. A weasel is going to be a really long horizontal box. A Garanuk is a long, tall box. Right? It happens to be that this deer is roughly a square. The next thing I think about is how far down this box is my belly line. A cow is going to be mostly belly, with a little bit of leg coming down. But what I want to look at is for whatever critter I'm looking at. Well, this one, it's a little bit less than half. Once I've got this, I'm going to start looking at where the head comes in. People tend to put the head too far out, make it too high, or make it too big. So I'm thinking of the size of that head, and where does that go relative to the body? If I put a head in and it feels too large to me, it's just with non-photo blue pencil, I just draw another head. I can get several heads down there, and then one of them will like, oh yeah, okay, I like that position better. So you can move these little elements around a lot. And then I'm going to take a little nose and stick a box of a nose on the front. All right? So I often think of drawing a skull as the round brain case, then with a little snout box stuck onto the end of that. The length of that snout is going to change with different critters. So, for instance, a cat has a very short snout. Dogs and deer have a much longer one. So the length of that box is going to change with different critters. Now I'm going to suggest the location of the legs. What I'm doing is I am just making straight lines coming down for my front legs, and I have that spring suggested for my back legs. Notice that these legs are not coming in at the front and back corner of the box. So the legs do not come up and attach to this point. They don't come up and attach to that point of the box. They're coming in a little bit interior of the corners of the box. So this support of this box here, that's not going to be where the leg is. With these lines and the zigzag for the back legs, I can very quickly get down a leg pose. And that's what I want to do with these first drawings. This is something I'm trying to do really, really quickly. Now I want to refine it a little bit. And to help me do that, I'm going to employ what I think is the most powerful, underutilized drawing trick in the book. And this is called looking at a negative space. If I'm looking at the shape of the deer and its body, there's so much detail here that my brain gets distracted, and it's hard for me to see a shape. But if instead of looking at the deer, I look at something like, say, the space of the air between its legs here, there's no detail here. And what I can do is use that as a shape to guide me starting to get the angles of this deer. And here's what happens very often. I will have my drawing kind of roughly blocked in, and I then start kind of looking at the negative shape. And I start to think to myself, you know what? The negative shape that I'm seeing doesn't really fit with the lines that I've already put here on my page. Right? And I will think to myself, like, you know, it should be, oh yeah, this is a taller box than what I've made. I notice something like that. It's really easy for your brain to notice that the negative shape doesn't quite work, and what you do with that information is we tend just to ignore it. We tend to go la 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 la, and this little voice in the back of your head is going, I think the negative space is a little bit higher, right? And you're going like, yeah. Look, I want to get on and draw the fur and the nose and the antlers, so just be quiet over there. It's like it should be a little bit higher, right? And you're like, shh. I just want to get, and this voice is coming in, and this voice is telling you this incredibly useful little tidbit that will fix your proportion problems. The negative space is there to fix all your proportion problems, right? So what we do is we just ignore it. We go like quiet over there. I want to go draw the nose, right? And then we finally get to the end of the drawing, and then we look at it and we go like, huh, the legs are too short. And your little voice is going, I told you, right? Like back at the start of the drawing, if you just listened to me, right, we could have fixed this, right? But you're like I wanted to draw the nose. It's like, okay, you drew the nose, but now you got legs, they're too short. So when you get this little kind of insight from your little inner voice that says, this negative space doesn't fit. Believe the negative space. Believe the negative space. And what you're going to do is, these are just lines that you're making with your initial non-photo blue pencil. You're going to then morph the rest of the thing around that negative space. You are not committed to any of those first lines that you put down. Believe the negative space. It is your best friend. A few other great negative spaces are ones that you can see behind the back of the legs here, also in front and behind the neck. Sometimes they're even right here under the throat. That can be, you see that. Like here's an example of looking at negative spaces. Don't look at the deer. Look at the shape of the air underneath its legs. Do you see how that's a shape? Right? You see how when you focus on that, you can like, oh yeah, I can draw that. It comes up at an angle, down, flat, then down like that. You can get that. But if you start to put this in and realize that in your drawing it's too short, don't ignore that feedback. Believe the negative space. Go like, oh, thank you for noticing, helping me see at the start of the drawing here that I need to fix that. Look at this great negative space here. Look at that. You look at the air back here, you can get the flow of that neck. Once you're looking at the deer itself, you're actually distracted from the shape of its edge. But you can see the shape of the edge when you're looking at the air behind it. Look at that. Does it make sense what a negative space is? This is, I think, the most underutilized, awesome drawing trick. Start incorporating negatives, looking for the negative spaces in anything. Like if there's a person standing here like this, all right? People will like draw their trunk and then they'll draw their arm. Much easier is to draw the shape of the air right there. You get that, the shape of your arm is going to automatically work. If you can get that simpler thing, this larger, complex shape is going to work. Negative space is your best friend. So here are a few of my little negative space lines, carving those in. We'll be going into this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but what I also like to do is to block in some of the major masses of the muscles of the legs. And we'll take a closer look at what is the reasoning behind the reason I'm doing this way. But for now, just notice a couple of things. That first of all, the muscles of the back leg are bigger than the muscles of the front. Right? Thing to notice number two, as you go down the leg, or more distal from the core of the body, we go from big massive muscles to a medium-sized one to a skinny one. What you're doing is you're taking all the mass of this body and moving it up towards the core. This makes sense from the physics of body mechanics. If you have a big weight out here, it's hard to move this limb. The more you take that weight and move it in here, proximal to the core here, then you are in really, really good shape.